My name is Stephen Katz. I have the pleasure and honor of being the advisor to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and I'll be sort of emceeing this evening's occasion. Tonight, I have two tasks. The first is to welcome everyone. The IHRA and the Holy See are delighted to have all of you here. We have very distinguished diplomatic corps present. We have academics of distinction. We have journalists, media experts, faculty and students from Rome's universities, members of the Vatican community, and a good number of our very valued IRA colleagues, both diplomats and academics. Tonight, I'm confident, given the exceptional pool of talent that has been assembled, that this evening's program and tomorrow's heavy sessions, 3 important panels and then a very significant roundup, will set in motion a very interesting and hopefully productive conversation about an issue that is at the top of Europe's social and political agenda, the agenda of other countries, and that, of course, is the pressing issue of refugees. I hope that we can throw some light on that issue by our historical comparisons and our contemporary reflections. Our first speaker this evening is Ambassador Mihnea Constantinescu, who is this year's chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Ambassador Constantinescu is representing the Romanian chairmanship. He's been a very distinguished chair. He was born in Bucharest in 1961. He received his early education at the University of Bucharest and his PhD in engineering at the Polytechnic University in that city in 1996. He joined the Foreign Office, and in addition to his IHRA position, he seems to be single-handedly running the country. He's the ambassador in charge of special representation for economic diplomacy and energy security in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and previously he served in 6 governments as director of the Prime Minister's Office, state counselor and diplomatic counselor to the Prime Minister, and as the spokesman for the government. As a diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he has held a wide variety of very significant positions. And so it's my great pleasure to ask him to say a few words of introduction. Ambassador.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, it is a great honor to open the conference Refugee Policies from 1933 until Today, Challenges and Responsibilities. Noting that compassion and generosity to refugees is one of the hallmarks of the mission of His Holiness Pope Francis, it is a great privilege for the IHRA to hold this event in cooperation with the Holy See. Please let me begin by expressing our particularly heartfelt thanks to His Excellency Archbishop Paul Gallagher, Secretary for Relations with States, Msgr Antoine Camilleri, Undersecretary for Relations with States, Msgr Ionuț Paul Strejac from the Secretariat of State of the Holy See, and Father Norbert Hoffman, Secretary of the Vatican Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, without whom this conference would have never come into being. We are also delighted to welcome His Excellency Archbishop Silvano Maria Tomasi, Secretary Delegate of the Dicastery for Promoting the Integral Human Development, as our keynote speaker this evening. Let me also thank the other representatives of the Holy See and the IHRA, who are here acting as moderators and rapporteurs. IHRA is represented by committed individuals who are the heart and soul of our organization, and I deeply appreciate their continuous support and advice. Looking at the program, I am sure you will note that our invited panelists come from a host of varied and well-respected organizations who have refugee policy at the center of their work. I thank our external panelists for joining us at this important event. For you to understand the genesis of the IHRA, let me briefly take you back to a historic meeting which was held in January 2000 in Stockholm. Former Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson had been concerned by a poll conducted in Sweden which seemed to show that high school children had little knowledge of the Holocaust. Barely half a century after the horror of the Holocaust, Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor were beginning to fade into history, to disappear from collective memory. Recognizing the crucial need for a coordinated international effort on Holocaust-related issues, Persson brought together representatives of 46 states with scholars, educators, and survivors to attend the Stockholm Forum that January in the year 2000. That meeting was also attended by 5 representatives of the Holy See. In the written message to the delegation of the Holy See submitted to the Forum, they outlined their hope that justice and peace will be the result of all endeavors that the Forum might inspire. The initial outcome of the Forum was the Stockholm Declaration and the formation of a unique network which exists today as the IHRA. In the Stockholm Declaration, which outlines the commitment of our member countries, we echo the words of the Holy See to reaffirm humanity's common aspiration for mutual understanding and justice. As an organization which deals with the history of the Holocaust, the IHRA knows all too well the consequences of the international community failing to respond appropriately to humanitarian crisis. The circumstances surrounding the current refugee situation are notably different from the persecution of Jews and other victims before, during, and after the Holocaust. Nonetheless, there are parallels between the treatment of refugees then and now, particularly regarding the closing of borders, the rise of xenophobia, and the use of dehumanizing language. Expert delegates of the IHRA are profoundly concerned about the plight of the refugees fleeing war-torn countries and the current trend of rising anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment, and right-wing nationalism. The IHRA greatly respects the work of organizations and volunteers on the ground working to help ensure dignified treatment and sanctuary for people seeking refuge. However, as a network of policymakers, historians, and educators, the IHRA wishes to contribute to supporting this important work in the best way it knows how. This is through sharing experience. Policymakers and people working on the ground with refugees have little to no time to read anthologies of the refugee policies of the 1930s. But IHRA experts can make knowledge on successful and failed refugee policies from the past visible and accessible to organizations and governments dealing with this issue today. This is what we try to do in our recent publication on the neutral countries and the Shoah. And this is what we try to do here today. Let us call this historically informed policy making. We wish to establish ourselves not only as a body of historical experts, but as an institution which reflects on the past in order to contribute to positive and ethical solutions to the worrying challenges of the present. This is the IHRA contribution to seeking justice and peace, and we are honored to have the Holy See cooperate with us here today in working toward this noble goal. In the summer 1938, delegates from 32 countries met at the French resort of Evian. Records note that country delegate after delegate took the floor to express great sympathy to the plight of refugees. But as Time magazine reported, most of them pleaded that they had already absorbed their capacity, or even turned in a flat no to Jews. In winter of that year, the first Kindertransport train left Berlin for Harwich in the United Kingdom. There are touching photographs of unaccompanied minors arriving on British soil, but there are no photographs of their parents left to their fates in Nazi Europe. 6 months later, the vast majority of 937 passengers on board the SS St. Louis, mostly Jews fleeing the Third Reich, were turned away from the American continent before being forced to return across the Atlantic. By the end of the war, 254 of them would be dead, murdered in Sobibor, in Auschwitz-Birkenau, in Buchenwald. Ladies and gentlemen, needless to say, the list above is not exhaustive. As Professor Yehuda Bauer always reminds us, no one comes out of the Holocaust clean. Let us remember the policies that brought relief, but let us not forget the failures of the international community. I finish with these examples of the failure from the not-too-distant past, because they are so very relevant today. I urge you to keep them in your minds as we discuss. Let us call to mind those individuals who, in this very moment, find themselves standing before a sealed border with nowhere to go. We must offer a way out. We must make a place. We must act together as a humble reflection of the saint wisdom. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we shall reap if we do not grow weary. I'm confident that this conference will be an important contribution to the present international initiatives addressing the situation of the refugees in the world. And let us raise awareness and speak out of the problems they are facing, inspired in each of our endeavor by the visionary and the generous encouragements expressed by His Holiness Pope Francis. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Constantinescu. I have the pleasure now as our second speaker to ask Archbishop Paul Richard Gallagher to address the Assembly. Archbishop Gallagher has been the senior liaison between the Holy See and the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in planning and executing this conference. Born in Liverpool and educated at St. Francis Xavier College, he was ordained an archbishop in July 1977. He then went on to receive a doctorate in canon law and joined the Holy See's Diplomatic Corps in 1984. Since then, he has held senior diplomatic posts around the world, serving as the papal nuncio in Burundi, Guatemala, and Australia. In 2014, he was chosen by Pope Francis to be the Secretary for Relations with States, and over the past 2 years, he has been the chief representative of the Holy See in its relations with Palestine. It's a pleasure to turn the floor over to Archbishop Gallagher.
Thank you, Professor Katz, for your kind words of introduction. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first let me express a warm welcome to everyone, also in the name of Pope Francis, who sends us his best wishes and accompanies us with his prayers this evening. I am delighted to greet you today in this beautiful and historic palazzo, which is a little piece of Vatican territory in the heart of Rome. To greet you on the occasion of the opening of the conference organized by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, in collaboration with the Holy See's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. The Palazzo della Cancelleria is well known to opera lovers as the site of the second act of Tosca. So if you hear Scarpia singing down the corridors, don't be afraid. Perhaps you should be more afraid because it is also, I believe, the site of the assassination of Pope Pius IX's head of government, Cardinal Antonelli, in the 19th century. Allow me to greet His Excellency Ambassador Mihnea Constantinescu, Chair of IHRA, who dedicated time and energy in organizing this conference, together with His Excellency Ambassador Liviu Petru Zapustan, the Ambassador of Romania to the Holy See, and the staff of the Embassy of Romania to the Holy See. I also wish to greet Dr. Catherine Meyer, Executive Secretary to IHRA, and Professor Stephen Katz, Advisor to IHRA, and not least Father Norbert Hoffmann, Secretary of the Commission for Religious Relations with Jews and the Holy See's contact person with IHRA. And finally, I also wish to greet my colleague Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, who will deliver the keynote speech this evening. This conference represents a major collaboration between the Holy See and IHRA on an issue that has been close to Pope Francis's heart since the very beginning of his pontificate. We hope that this conference will be an important contribution to addressing the various refugees crises that have been engulfing the world over the last few years and raise awareness about the realities of their suffering and, more importantly, bring about solutions. Before doing so, however, I would like to say a few words about IHRA and the Holy See in the context of Catholic-Jewish relations. For almost 20 years since it was established in Stockholm on the 7th of May 1998, through the initiative of the former Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has focused on Holocaust education, remembrance and research. During its activities, it has addressed important topics such as anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, the situation of the Roma and the Roma genocide, comparative genocide, Holocaust education, and promoting Holocaust memorial days. These topics are of interest for the Holy See, which follows with special attention the work of IHRA. Indeed, the presence of the Holy See representatives at IHRA plenary meetings in the past few years in the United Kingdom, in Hungary and in Romania, and the designation of a contact person in February 2015 are concrete signs of the Holy See's interest and appreciation for IHRA's work in the context of Catholic-Jewish relations. In 2015, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council's declaration Nostra Aetate, the document that heralded a new springtime, a veritable thaw of Catholic-Jewish relations and dialogue. This document, promulgated on the 28th of October 1965, states explicitly and unequivocally the Catholic Church's attitude towards anti-Semitism. I quote, "The Church repudiates all persecutions against any man. Moreover, mindful of her common patrimony with the Jews and motivated by the gospel's spirit of love and by no political considerations, she deplores the hatred, persecutions, and displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and from any source." End of quotation. Another important step in this dialogue was the establishment in 1974 of the Commission for Religious Relations with Jews in order to promote and foster dialogue with the Jewish people on a global level. Among the most important topics of the work of this Commission is the question of how to combat anti-Semitism and education about the Holocaust. As an entity of the Holy See, it is not the task of the Commission to organize commemorations for the whole Catholic Church. Rather, it is to establish the theoretical framework for dealing with Holocaust issues and to produce general guidelines for the Catholic Church that may be of use at the local and national levels for the development of concrete measures for education and Holocaust remembrance initiatives. I would like to mention briefly two important documents on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. First, the Commission's 1985 document entitled Notes on the Correct Way to Present Jews and Judaism in Preaching and Catechesis in the Roman Catholic Church. This document referred explicitly to the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, which sadly is always ready to appear under different guises, and thus it called for the urgency and importance of precise, objective, and rigorously accurate teaching on Judaism. The other significant document, coincidentally issued in the same year that IHRA was founded in 1998, was the Commission's document entitled We Remember, a reflection on the Shoah. On the occasion of its publication, which he had desired expressly, Pope John Paul II, who in 1979 had been the first pope to visit Auschwitz, wrote that on numerous occasions during my pontificate, I have recalled with a sense of deep sorrow the sufferings of the Jewish people during the Second World War. The crime which became known as the Shoah remains an indelible stain on history. At Auschwitz, Pope John Paul II knelt and prayed in silence for the victims of the Holocaust. He also prayed at the Yad Vashem Memorial during his visit to the Holy Land in 2000. These powerful acts of prayer and commemoration were also made by Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis in 2016. And at Yad Vashem in 2014, thus confirming the Church's commitment at the highest level to remembering the Shoah. Why this commitment to remembering the Shoah? The document We Remember offers two basic reasons. First, in the face of such evil and injustice, no one can remain indifferent. Our shared humanity demands of us not to be indifferent. More than that, however, the Church cannot remain indifferent by reason of her very close bonds of spiritual kinship with the Jewish people. Thus, in many countries, for example, Italy, Austria, Poland, the Netherlands, Switzerland, the bishops' conferences have introduced a Day of Judaism in order to commemorate the victims of the Shoah and to draw attention to the Jewish roots of the Christian faith and the progress made in Jewish Catholic dialogue. In this regard, we can mention the annual commemorations of Kristallnacht on the 9th of November and the liberation of Auschwitz on the 27th of January. But there is also a second reason, recalled often by John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis. We remember the Shoah in order that it may never be repeated again. Speaking to the members of the delegation of the Conference of European Rabbis on the 20th of April 2015, Pope Francis described the great tragedy of the Shoah that took place in the heart of Europe as a warning to present and future generations. More recently, this past 27th of January, when he received a delegation of the European Jewish Congress, and last week, on the 9th of February, when he received a delegation of the Anti-Defamation League, he stressed once again the importance of remembering past tragedies so that they may not be repeated. Moreover, we have to promote the culture of encounter and reconciliation that engenders life and gives rise to hope, in contrast to the non-culture of hate that sows death and reaps despair. To this end, let us continue to help one another, he said, as Pope John Paul II desired, to enable memory to play its necessary part in the process of shaping a future in which the unspeakable iniquity of the Shoah will never again be possible. We remember a future of genuine respect for the life and dignity of every people and every human being. In all these remarks, there is a clear and unequivocal message. We must learn from the lessons of the past, so that never again may be our constant refrain and objective. We remember, so that we may build together a better future. I have referred to just a few of the more recent encounters of Pope Francis with some Jewish groups, but there are many other similar occasions with previous popes and also at the national and local levels of the Church, which indicate the fruitful ongoing dialogue between Catholics and Jews. While IHRA, of course, is not a Jewish organization, but an alliance of governments committed to Holocaust education, remembrance, and education, the Holy See values its relationship with IHRA in the context of Catholic-Jewish dialogue and cooperation that seeks to promote a culture of encounter and collaboration in facing the problems of today's world. Thus, this conference is an expression of our common desire to learn from the lessons of the past, so that we may respond better to the actual refugee crisis, as well as the phenomenon of migration that have reached new levels, in part because of wars and conflicts that have deprived people of hope for a better future. In fact, it is precisely the memory and experience of the past, and in particular the past tragedy of the Jewish people, that urges us to work to ensure that such a tragedy is never repeated to any group of people. Thus, the phenomenon of refugees needs to be grounded in the realization that every human life is sacred and inviolable and needs to be defended. Down through the years, the Holy See has focused on the humanitarian aspect of the refugee crisis, but it is also focused on welcoming refugees and their integration in their host countries by intervening with local churches and governments and seeking always a culture of dialogue and mutual understanding that respects human life as sacred and inviolable. The moral authority of the Pope and the Apostolic See has constantly been recognized, and this has been demonstrated by the frequent appeals of international organizations requesting help and interventions in various situations. The action of the Holy See, however, is not limited to the aforementioned aspects. In fact, the Holy See has always urged facing the root causes that give rise to refugees in the first place, and in this regard, the Holy See has constantly made appeals for peace and reconciliation in an effort to prevent humanitarian crises. Moreover, in following the social doctrine of the Church, the popes have unceasingly reaffirmed the importance of integral human development, the equitable distribution of goods, and the fight against injustice. It is my hope, therefore, that this conference, by reflecting on the themes proposed and in the light of the memories and experiences of the past, may help bring forth new responses to current challenges. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Gallagher. Tonight, as I said in my role as advisor, I've been asked to say a couple of things by way of thank you and also to explain what we're trying to accomplish in a little more detail. First of all, thanks, of course, go to His Holiness Pope Francis. Obviously, this could not have happened without his approval, his support, and we're deeply appreciative. Secondly, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and his departmental colleagues were crucial to the successful realization of the original vision that led to this conference. In particular, I want to thank publicly Archbishop Paul Gallagher, Secretary for Relations with the States within the Holy See, who became our senior contact, and you've just heard his remarkable and wonderful presentation. It's also a pleasure to publicly acknowledge the consistent support and help of Monsignor Antoine Camilleri, who's sitting here and has been a great friend for about 10 years now. I think we've been trying to do different things, not just this conference, and he's always been enormously supportive, who is Under Secretary of State in the Office of Relations with States of the Holy See. Also, a deep debt of gratitude is owed to Father Norbert Hoffman. Father Hoffman, since 2015, has been a liaison on the day-to-day job between the Vatican and IHRA. His work usually takes place within the Commission of the Holy See for Religious Relations with the Jews, and he has devoted himself to the present project with great sincerity. Also, he has done everything that we've asked him to do here in Rome. Everything required was done effectively and with great courtesy, and we thank Father Hoffman very much. I'm used to calling people professor. In addition, I want to thank Msgr. Silvano Maria Tomasi, who will be introduced more fully in a moment, for accepting our invitation to be tonight's primary plenary speaker. On the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance side of the ledger, thanks must first of all go to Ambassador Constantinescu, this year's chair representing the Romanian chairmanship. He has been closely associated with every phase of the conception and planning of the program. He has taken all his responsibilities with great seriousness and dedication, and has met all the weighty obligations with a light touch, great good humor, and exceptional diplomatic skills. Then, too, a great debt is owed to Dr. Catherine Meyer, the Executive Secretary of IHRA. Dr. Meyer has played a central role in translating this project from idea to reality. She has overseen all the complex details with her usual thoroughness and concern, and she has made meeting the many and diverse needs of the conference committee a priority in the very busy office in Berlin. In this connection, several Berlin colleagues at IHRA also worked tirelessly. Laura Robertson, Leonard Aldick, Rosalind Krajanovic, and especially Ezgi Akarsu. Ms. Akarsu took on the main responsibility for coordinating all the endless correspondence and saw to it that all the practical necessities were satisfactorily dealt with. She has been a marvel of efficiency, responsibility, and generosity, and I want to thank her very much. It is also a very real pleasure to thank my academic colleagues from the IHRA working groups, who over time made up 2 conference planning committees. The first of these included Dr. Cecily Banka from Denmark, Dr. Robert Williams from Washington, Dr. Mark Weitzman from New York, and Dr. David Silberklang from Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and Dr. Wolf Kaiser from Germany. The second committee was comprised of Ambassador Michael Bayer, who is here this evening, from Austria, Dr. Firla Vanden-Dalen from Belgium, and Dr. Robert Williams, again from America. The quality of the final conference program is a testament to their good judgment, to their erudition, and to their tireless efforts. And last but not least, a profound thanks to all of our speakers who generously accepted our invitation to participate in this meeting. Now, as to the meeting itself. As program chairman of the conference committee, I would like to convey, as clearly as I can, what the organizers of this conference hope it will accomplish. It has been created in response to a deep concern shared by the Holy See and the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance regarding one of the most significant political and humanitarian problems of our time, the refugee crisis in contemporary Europe. Over the next day and a half, everyone will learn a good deal of important information about what has been done in the past in response to prior crises of this sort, especially the massive humanitarian emergency created by the Holocaust and World War II. However, our primary concern today is not with history, with what has been. Our primary concern today is to face the current critical situation and the very real challenges that we all know, which is to say we review the past in order to learn the mistakes that were made so that we can do better both functionally and ethically. The present very difficult circumstances have generally been met with uncertainty by the relevant government and non-governmental actors who have been called upon, willingly or not, to play a meaningful role. But while acknowledging this, the conversation that begins this evening has no interest in recriminations or in allocating blame. Instead, it is intended to start a substantive and utilitarian dialogue among all the interested parties who have a stake in resolving the present emergency. This necessarily involves the churches as well as the main organs of civil society, including the press and all the relevant NGOs, who can make meaningful contributions in this context. And it is also a conversation that must include the countries of Africa and the Middle East from where the refugees come. The concern is to find common ground, difficult as this may be, so as to begin to ameliorate the present situation. It is transparently evident that the subject of asylum seekers and refugees creates intense passions and has stirred a variety of actions and rhetorical excesses across the political spectrum. Against this torrent of emotion, of accusations and counter-accusations, of epithets and verbal abuse, it is the hope of the organizers of this conference that we can create a calm, open environment in which these passions can be tamed and a space created in which a civil and productive conversation about fair and responsible programs to address this highly problematic circumstance can take place. What the organizers of this conference aspire to is to move beyond talk to generate meaningful ideas that will assist both those in need of refuge and those who are asked to provide this refuge. This is the present imperative, and it is one that will not decrease nor disappear over the coming decades. Birth rates and the phenomena of population growth and decline in different parts of the world will continue to change the world we live in. I note that demographically, Europe is declining quite dramatically. At the start of the 20th century, the countries that currently comprise the European Union collectively represented 14% of the world's population. Today, they represent 6%, and in the future, they will represent even fewer. Alternatively, Africa and most of the countries of the Muslim world are growing quite rapidly, while continued globalization will assure that this issue remains central and inescapable. Moreover, even without any alteration in demographics, there are, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 21.5 million individuals who are today classed as refugees. That is, people who, fearing for their safety, have uprooted themselves and left their homeland. At the same time, according to the same source, the conflicts that cause these departures take, on average, 37 years to come to a resolution, and the average refugee needs 17 years to locate a permanent home. Thus, what is urgently required are rational, mediating, practical solutions that can garner sufficiently broad national and international support. And it may well be that different solutions are necessary for different countries and regions. In some places, it may be that aid would mean in-migration, in others, financial assistance, in still others, limited time work permits, or alternatively, it could entail providing massive development aid for those countries from which the refugees and economic migrants come. But we can find these answers only if we have the needed conversation. Neither IHRA nor the Holy See can make refugee policy, nor is this our collective intention. Indeed, we hope, through the dialogue that begins tonight and continues tomorrow, to help those who do have the great responsibility to undertake such policy, to learn from the past, and to make recommendations that what we might do together. and we hope to show that we can carry on this conversation without rancor and in the absence of overheated rhetoric. And where better to begin such a dialogue than at the Vatican? Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our main plenary speaker this evening, Archbishop Silvano Maria Tomasi. Archbishop Tomasi was born in Italy and ordained as a priest of the Congregation of the Missionaries of St. Charles. He then earned a doctorate in sociology from Fordham University in New York City. On June 27, 1989, Pope John Paul appointed him to the position of Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerant Peoples. And in 1996, he was appointed Archbishop of Sursina and Apostolic Nuntiary to Eritrea and Ethiopia. In November 2000, he's appointed as the Apostolic Nuncio in Djibouti, and from there appointed as the permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations in Geneva. In this role, he has especially championed the protection of vulnerable children around the world. Thus, he is uniquely prepared, uniquely qualified to address the subject of this conference, and I'm delighted to ask him to take the podium.
Good evening. Our has been defined the age of migrations. Population movements crisscross the globe in a variety of conditions and is a result of many different causes. People move because of wars and persecution, of ethnic conflicts, of economic inequalities and famine, of climate change and natural disasters. The World Bank estimates that 250 million people live and work or are resettled in a country different than the one where they were born. All these people look for survival and protection, and many are victims forcibly uprooted from their homes and countries. In fact, the world has reached now the highest number of forcibly displaced persons since the end of World War II. The annual report, Global Trends of the UN High Commissioner of Refugees, as we have just heard, informs us that in 2015 there were 65.3 million persons forced to escape from their home. 23 million of them refugees compared to 59 million of the previous years. This conference, jointly organized by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and the Holy See, is certainly timely and opportune. Indifference and forgetfulness can kill, as tragic events in our recent history have shown. I am grateful for the kind invitation to share some thoughts on the refugee situation today. I will briefly present a very succinct sketch of where we stand with legal protection, a reference to the current data on refugees, the commitment of the Church and of the international community to their cause. Reflecting on refugees, I could not avoid rethinking of the dozens of camps and refugee groups I have met in the course of the years in Cambodia, Thailand, Hong Kong, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Zambia, Sudan, or refugees taking the first steps to resettle in the Canada or the United States. A long list of places and people whose suffering doesn't seem to have taught many lessons. Forced migration and flows of asylum seekers are perhaps the most difficult challenge to the international community. The Special Representative on Migration of the UN General Secretary adds with a certain sadness, we have a duty to first address the root causes of forced migration, to relieve the terrible suffering of the people forced to leave their homes, and three, find solutions to their plight. On all three fronts, individual states and the United Nations have been failing. True, the world is a long way off in responding adequately to the plight of refugees. The legal protection of the rights of refugees and migrants in modern times, however, has been steadily refined and made more effective. An organic attempt to coordinate assistance and to facilitate a solution to the predicament of refugees began at the end of World War II, when the countries of Europe were faced with the responsibility to find a solution for several million displaced victims left over by the destruction and the restructuring of borders brought about by the war. The international community produced the Refugee Convention of 1951 and its 1967 protocol that are still the pillars of the current global architecture for the governance of forcibly displaced people and the legal basis for protection and assistance to those who are recognized within the meaning of the Convention. However, several states, including those that are home to the largest number of world's refugees like Jordan and Pakistan, have not ratified one or both of these documents. Moreover, some countries that have acceded to the Convention maintain practical indifference to its principles and injunctions. As the priority of human rights took hold in the activities of the UN through the progressive enactment of major conventions specifying the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, basic rights were recognized for forcibly displaced people. For example, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment of 1984 states in Article 3, no state party shall expel, return, and the verb used in this case is refouler, so the whole doctrine of refoulement is recalled, or extradite a person to another state where there are substantial grounds for believing that he would be in danger of being subjected to torture. The Convention on the Rights of the Child of 1989 states in Article 22 that states parties shall take appropriate measures to ensure that a child who is seeking refugee status or who is considered a refugee in accordance with the applicable international or domestic law and procedure shall, whether unaccompanied or accompanied by his or her parents or by any other person, receive appropriate protection and humanitarian assistance in the enjoyment of applicable rights set forth in the present Convention. International declarations and recommendations have multiplied as crises multiply. And I have contributed my share in the various years spent as Vatican representatives to the UN and the international organizations in Geneva. In fact, notwithstanding the progress made, it seems to me that the legal protection of refugees is still in the phase of the iure condendo. There are regional instruments that have been developed and that point out the way forward. An example is the African Union Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, the Kampala Convention as it is called, that entered into force in 2012. Another example is the 1984 Cartagena Declaration on Refugees, Colloquium on the International Protection of Refugees in Central America, Mexico, and Panama. But events and social changes have moved at a faster pace than juridical efforts. New categories of people are not included in any juridical provision, notwithstanding their vulnerability and rightful claim to the solidarity of the international community, because the desert or the ocean have eliminated their area of livelihood. There is an increasing consensus that an urgent task is to define the responsibility of states toward people on the move who are in vulnerable situations and may not be able to return home, but do not qualify for protection under the 1951 Convention. Discernment is required to address the large gray areas in mixed flows that include people escaping extreme poverty and those who flee literally at gunpoint. Indeed, states may occasionally adopt a more compassionate policy, as when they give protection to war refugees without having to prove that they face a threat of persecution as individuals. Humanitarian visas may be given to victims of natural disasters or of generalized violence in failed states. The flexibility of states is more an ad hoc response and lacks a systemic and much less a binding policy. The juridical and the political approaches have not moved in parallel. While some progress has been evident in the steady development of human rights implementation and in the agreement of binding measures of protection, the gap on conditions on the ground has remained wide. Certainly, an eventual juridical agreement covering all vulnerable groups is desirable, but it remains insufficient, and this awareness prompted Pope Francis to write to the Secretary General of the United Nations on August 2014, saying, "The tragic experiences of the 20th century, as well as the most elementary notion of human dignity, require the international community, especially through the norms and mechanisms of international law, to do all that is possible to stop and prevent further systematic violence against ethnic and religious minorities." The political will to develop and to apply norms and mechanisms of international law is the key factor, of course. If we look at the current world's scene, the resistance to open the door to asylum seekers and other desperate migrants is very evident in the populist parties that have emerged, in the focus on border control, detention, repatriation schemes, in building walls and fences and policies of border externalization. This attitude of rejection notwithstanding, the effort continues toward finding a humane response to displaced people. At the UN level, last September 2016, world leaders came together at the General Assembly and adopted the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, which expresses the political will of world leaders to protect the rights of refugees and migrants, to save lives, and share responsibility for large movements on a global scale. A recent ecumenical initiative provides an additional model to follow: the use of humanitarian corridors to resettle vulnerable refugees. Such an initiative is particularly timely if we consider that the average stay in refugee camps is 17 years, and these refugees fade from the headlines in the meantime. A step forward has been taken in the state's pledge to reach a common understanding at the global level on who needs international protection, and to embody this in guiding principle on migrants in vulnerable situations. These measures may in time evolve into soft law and maybe even into binding legal instruments. To sustain this effort, however, a realistic view of the human person is necessary, as well as a sensibility that comes from the heart, inspired by this view and by faith. Without an anthropology that recognizes the equal dignity of every person and that appreciates the transcendent dimension in every person, it seems to me that it is not possible to promote a public culture of solidarity and respect of every person without any distinction. These convictions become the platform on which acceptance of refugees, and more important, the prevention of their production, is possible, including by addressing the root causes of forced migration. As Pope Francis stated in his 2015 message for the World Day of Migrants and Refugees, solidarity with migrants and refugees must be accompanied by the courage and creativity necessary to develop on a worldwide level a more just and equitable financial and economic order, as well as an increasing commitment to peace, the indispensable condition for all authentic progress. In fact, let us not forget that along with the right to leave one's homeland, each person has the right not to leave and to live there in peace and dignity. Religious-inspired organizations, individuals and businesses have rescued people at sea, have helped with the reception and integration of refugees and migrants in local communities, at times by hosting them in their homes, offered legal aid, translation services, by providing private sponsorship, and much more. The root of this generosity is found in the Bible. Speaking to the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, Pope Francis reminded us of the biblical message. The Bible as a whole recounts the history of a humanity on the move. For mobility is part of our human nature. Human history is made up of countless migrations, sometimes out of an awareness of the right to choose freely, and often dictated by external circumstances. From the banishment from Eden to Abraham's journey to the Promised Land, from the Exodus story to the deportation to Babylon, sacred scriptures describes the struggles and sufferings, the desires and hopes which are shared by the hundreds of thousands of persons on the move today, possessed of the same determination which Moses had to reach a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of freedom and peace. Now as then, we hear Rachel weeping for her children who are no more. Hers is the plea of thousands of people who weep as they flee horrific wars, persecutions and human rights violations, or political or social instability, which often make it impossible for them to live in their native lands. It is the outcry of those forced to flee in order to escape unspeakable acts of cruelty towards vulnerable persons, such as children and the disabled, or martyrdom solely on account of their religion. By placing at the center of all considerations the dignity of the human person, created in the image of God, we establish the premise that the other is not a threat and that to welcome him can be an enrichment. Again, Pope Francis, who has reserved to himself directly the care of migrants and refugees, sums up the process well. The acceptance of migrants can thus prove a good opportunity for new understanding and broader horizons, both on the part of those accepted, who have the responsibility to respect the values, traditions, and laws of the community which takes them in, and on the part of the latter, who are called to acknowledge the beneficial contributions which each immigrant can make to the whole community. Putting together the principles derived from natural law, from faith and religious wisdom, and from experience, Christian reflection arrives at formulating an interpretative framework on migration that begins with the affirmation of the rights of the most vulnerable person and arrives to the duty of welcoming newcomers. In the current preoccupation with heightened security and the rising of new walls and fences at borders, the Church moves countercurrent and proposes solidarity with the arriving asylum seekers, since they share equal dignity and have a rightful claim to protection. While the states should at least respect the juridical commitment they have undertaken, the Church reminds society that the juridical aspect is a minimum. It does not exhaust the ethical responsibility, fruit of the conversion of the heart. It proposes a culture of welcome and encounter prompted by the awareness that we constitute one human family and that love is the main road to build a common future. At the same time, there are some basic values that newcomers must accept for a peaceful living together. In this context, the first step is giving priority to having correct information. There is neither an invasion nor a radical sudden transformation of society, a transformation that newcomers and native population can jointly manage. For example, the European Union takes 10% of the world's asylum seekers and Italy 3% of the 10%. The social doctrine of the Church provides a guide that inspires action for today's exodus. In fact, the Church responds to the challenge posed by the current migration crisis with a two-pronged approach, with their doctrine and with their action. In particular, the Church tirelessly advocates for the respect and promotion of all human rights of migrants and refugees, including education, so crucial for their future. Allow me to conclude with a Talmudic parable. Two brothers living with their families off the same plot of land must separate because a sudden drought causes a shortage of food insufficient to keep all of them alive. The older brother decides he will emigrate for his and his brother's survival. After many years, the younger brother decides to journey to meet and thank his older brother, who had sacrificed himself for him. As he moves along, he spots some movement far away and thinks that wild beasts are coming against him. He holds fast to his walking stick, ready to defend himself. As he advances closer, he realizes that coming in his directions were human persons, and he thinks in his fear that they are bandits, ready to assault him. By relying on his strong stick, he continues ahead. And finally, face to face with the approaching persons, he discovers that it is his brother who has come to meet him. All newcomers need to be discovered as our brothers. Then the international community will succeed in finding the needed juridical and political solutions to the plight of today's refugees. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Archbishop Tomasi. I think I'm especially pleased to see an Archbishop quote the Talmud at the end of his discussion. His remarks and the remarks of Archbishop Gallagher, echoing the teachings of the Pope, that human dignity, the dignity of every person, is really a key, needs to be repeated again and again because it's an essential thing. Also, I'd like to thank Ambassador Constantinescu for his remarks. I think this has gotten us off to a very good start. I thank all of you for coming. I hope we'll see you tomorrow. And now I'd like to invite everyone to a buffet and a chance to greet and meet in the next hall. Thank you very much.